to talk about the airport. Then our airport manager, Travis Biggs, is going to talk. He's going to turn it over to Dave Mitchell from TO Engineering, our consultant for the city on the different design standards and how the design alternatives you're going to see. And then Jeremy's going to finish that, Jeremy McAllister with TO Engineering. And then I'm going to come back up and we'll split up. But remember, when we split up, that's where you'll be able to ask all of our experts all of your questions, and they'll write them down, they'll take your comments. You can submit more comments, but we've got that 2-week window right now. Okay, everybody, let's take a big breath.
Before you stop, I just wanted you to amend. They said that we couldn't close the airport unless, and they said what it was, couldn't we have our federal representatives petition the FAA, our senators, and our congressmen petition the FAA to close it without going through the 20-year wait period?
I think that's a political solution, but the FAA doesn't like it.
Who cares?
I understand. Okay, so everybody, Mr. Talley, where you are, please come up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I get to cover kind of what we have been doing for the master plan and what we've been doing at the airport and some of the comments that we've taken thus far. The last time I was here was January of 2020, and I was eating cookies and thinking everything was fine, and it's taken almost 3 years to get back here. So it's nice to be here. So the airport is an important community asset. It supports our firefighting and our emergency services. It does create head of household jobs. It supports important economic drivers in our community like tourism and business travel. We also have a large degree of recreational aviation users. I'm one of those. Gliders, hot air balloons, and small general aviation. And it also does preserve a large amount of open space. Part of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight, some of the proposals are about that open space and how you can make sure that the airport is compliant with the safety standards. I'd like to tell you what we have accomplished with this airport master plan. For those of you that were here in 2020 and even before then, there are certain steps that the federal government requires us to go through as part of the master plan. They have a very prescribed process. That's why we have the experts from TO Engineers, and Aeroplex, and legal counsel to help us make sure that we go through this process in the manner that the FAA requires us to go through. A lot of this is, candidly, very monotonous work, and it is work that it takes a long time to come up with what some might think is a very easy answer, something of a self-evident, but we had to go through it anyway. So the first thing that we have done is we've created a draft chapter on our inventory, and the inventory is, information about the Heber Valley Airport, the surrounding community, the populations, what our economic drivers are here, the number of airport operations. You heard the experts earlier talk about the type of aircraft, this critical aircraft concept of a C2 airport or a C2 airplane. That was derived from this study. They had cameras that were out there. They were tracking all of the airplanes that were coming in and out. There were people that were tabulating that information. From there, a forecast was created. What do we expect this airport to look like from a use perspective over the next 10 to 20 years? And so a forecast was created, and then that was shared with the FAA, and the FAA has to agree with that forecast. We couldn't come up with a forecast hypothetically that might say we have 500 operations of this type of airplane today, and next year it's going to go to 20. Likewise, we couldn't use some of the data perhaps from March of 2020 through August of 2020 when a lot of people weren't traveling and we didn't have a lot of activity at the airport. So the FAA, that was kind of a back and forth discussion between the cities and the airport's consultants and the FAA to finally approve a forecast. After the forecast was approved, then we can go on to the facility requirements. And the facility requirements are now allowing us to take a look at what the federal design standards, and they've got a book like it's this thick that if you ever need to go to sleep at night, it's a great thing to read if you can't go to sleep. To determine the changes that need to be made, where we are compliant and where we are not compliant with the forecast and the inventory that was done. And then the last thing that we've accomplished, which is really what we're here tonight talking about, and you'll have a chance to observe from the experts and at the various stations in the back, is talking about some of the runway alternatives. Which alternatives are viable, which alternatives aren't viable. And there's lots of reasons on both sides of those. And I really encourage you to chat with the experts tonight, to provide comments, to provide feedback. They are listened to. I mean, on the airport board, we listen to the community, and that has been instrumental in some of the things that I think have resulted in where we are tonight. Tonight you're going to hear from Travis Diggs, our airport manager, about the vision and goals of the airport, what the city views as where we want to be over this master plan process over the next 10 to 20 years. Then the engineering team is going to lead you through some of the facility requirement data. They'll explain to you why we had to come up with these alternatives that we had to come up with. And then we really want your input. And I guess it's time for me to get off. Is that the music like in the awards? I really do encourage your input and your comments here. As the mayor indicated, there's I believe a 2-week period for those comments to be submitted. And then there'll be a council meeting, and that'll be an opportunity to speak at the podium and to be able to allow your comments to be heard. But sure, in addition to that, it's important that you understand that people like myself and Travis and your elected leaders, we want to hear from you as much as possible, right? So even though you're filling out a comment card here today and you're providing comments in other ways, I really do think it's important that engagement and those comments continue, and that you do that. I'm happy to talk with anybody at any time. I may not have an answer, probably don't, but I'll make sure that it gets to somebody that can get it. So with that, I think I will turn it back to you if you want to bring Travis up. Or...
Travis, please come and join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, my name is Travis Diggs. I'm the airport manager. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. Okay, when we started doing this, I started out as a volunteer at the airport about 7 years ago, and my whole goal was just to kind of clean it up, make it look nicer, put on public events, make it more fun for the community. So that's always been my goals. That's still my goals. But as we got into this, we didn't have anything written down for what our goals or our mission statement, our values. I handed out, hopefully a lot of you guys have those, but you should have the goals and values on there. I just wanted it written down so that we could know what we were doing, so that as we went through this process, we could go back to those visions and the goals of the community and of the users and tenants and everyone, so that we had something that we were based on. So as the consultants went through these things, they were basing it on those values and goals, and that's why I tried to hand them out to you so you can see what those were. And I'm not going to read them to you, so you can read them if you're interested in them. This is our values here. We want to be good neighbors. We want to do what we can to be good with the environment. We want to keep the airport at reasonable levels. We don't want just exponential growth of jets. We put these down because that's what we want. And so whatever we can legally do, that's what we want to do. As little as we have to do that can still maintain those goals that we have.
How do you slow down the jets coming down?
Good question.
There's a couple different ways, and we can talk about it. We're doing a couple of
What
different things.
else?
We done things, before we couldn't, the jets had to take off on 4, which means that they're taking off over our city. And that's when it's really loud, because they're full power and they're going right over our homes. And before that, they had to do that because FAA regulations for instrument procedures requires you to do that. And so we spoke with them and we explained that we would very much prefer if they took off on 2-2 so that they could go over the lake where there's not a lot of homes. And by the time
That's
they
not
get
what
to
they're doing.
2,000 feet, they're high and it's a lot less noisy.
That doesn't slow the amount of jets coming.
No, it doesn't slow down the jets, but it does help with the sound. And then we've done things where we put signs up where we encourage pilots. We have it right there, so every time they come in, because we get a lot of transient pilots, sometimes they come in once and never come again. So we put signs up, tell all the pilots, we very much prefer you to use 2-2 if you can. And so we're trying to educate different companies and stuff that we can to get them to take off in a different direction. These are the goals that we had. Like I say, you can read these. I just felt like we have a lot more in common than we have differences. And so, yes, there's things people don't agree on, there's different ways of doing things, but there's a lot of things that I think most of us in the community agree on. And so we wrote these down. Like I say, these are the things that we asked the consultants as they're looking into these different opportunities to go over these. And that's why I tried to get them to you guys so you can see what those are. 3 of the important factors as we went through this, like I say, the Airport Advisory Board, the community, and the City Council approved the mission statement and the vision and those things that I handed out. And those were kind of the backbone of this process. The biggest goals we have is, as Peter talked about a little bit earlier, is we need to be in compliance with the FAA standards. We need to keep an appropriate size airport. We're not trying to grow and get as big as we can. We're trying to do what we can legally to keep that small town feel and be a benefit to the community and to our gliders and to our balloons and to other people besides just corporate jets.
Yeah, but you can't stop the jets from coming.
No, there's a lot of things you can't
So,
stop, but
we
there's
have
things
no
that we
control
can
over that.
do. We have some control. and we'll go
What
over some of that.
control do you have to stop?
They're the experts and they'll talk to you about it back there. So the team of experts completed a pretty thorough analysis as they're going to go through a whole bunch of different scenarios, again, with the intent of trying to help us meet those goals that we have. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. They can go over some of these things that you've been asking about, and then we can split the groups.
Good evening, I'm Dave Mitchell with TO Engineers, and I'm going to cover the facility requirements portion of the master plan. Jason did a good job of outlining the process. We start with inventory, where are you now, forecast, where are you headed, and then under the forecast, there were 2 things that we're really looking for there. One is the critical aircraft. We've talked about that quite a bit. Based on, and what the critical aircraft is the most demanding aircraft that uses the airport regularly. And so that's a C2, and that increases from B2 to C2. And the purpose of those codes, it's called the Airport Reference Code, that letter number that we keep saying, is that's how the FAA determines what level of standards, what geometry applies to an airport. So it's very important going through the planning process. The other thing that comes out of the forecast is the future operations. What do we think traffic will look like in the future? And then that really defines what the demand is. And from that, we move into the facility requirements portion of the study. Now, obviously, ideally in planning, we move into facility requirements with, I don't know if it's ideal or not, but the theoretical is we move into facility requirements where we're going to meet all of the demand. And obviously that doesn't work very often. I've never worked on an airport where that works because every airport has constraints. And a few airports that I've had the privilege of working with can meet all of their demand. And that's certainly the case here at Heber. We have the highway, we have the community's clear direction that we don't want to expand the capabilities of the airport. And so the goal of this planning really is to meet safety standards and then do what we can with what's left to meet the other demand. So this is the critical aircraft. It's a has been discussed, C2 is airport currently operates at the airport. We're not designing for something new or bigger. We're designing for current traffic.
The Embraer 175 E2 lands at that area. That's a huge plane.
I understand.
The expansion would have G650 is coming in here, local 6,000s and 7,000s. What you're not saying is the fact that they're not landing here right now because their operational standards do deem it unsafe. You're wanting to expand it to lure them here. That's it.
That's
They're not landing because it's not wide enough. They're not landing right now. The G650s aren't not landing right now because it's not wide enough. And that's what we plan to do.
What we are designing is an airport that meets the standards for the traffic that currently uses the airport today.
A Challenger 350 is not the same kind of traffic that a G650 or a Global 7000 is. And anybody in aviation knows that.
Also, any jet that wants to land is allowed to land. They can't stop, no matter how big.
We understand. We understand. Believe me, I am with you. I understand. But let's keep going. And then be sure to put these things down.
This town is out of control with noise.
Nobody's going to read that.
Noise is out of
The definition of the critical aircraft, according to the FAA, is the most demanding aircraft that uses the airport 500 or more operations per year. That's what we designed for.
What's it designed for now?
The V2, but that's the point of the whole study, is you have more.
Landing because you can't deny an aircraft from landing. The difference is operational standards with all these operators aren't landing because it's not wide enough. So you're not getting the G650s and the billionaires.
Excuse me, really quick. I'm Scott Phil from the City Council.
Please go up to the microphone. Thank you.
I please would request that we follow what the mayor had asked and let the presentation proceed. You'll have plenty of time for questions. Don't make this discussion about you. Please let it go on.
About the whole town.
Yeah, you're not answering. So this is,
Town meeting regarding something that we care about and no one's allowed to talk about, but this is the best forum.
we have given our feedback over and over again, and it's ignored, and we're worried
It's
that...
totally ignored.
And we're worried that this is not going to matter. We give you our feedback and you're going to push ahead. You are a pilot. You want the airport. I get it. Other people in the council want the airport, but a lot of us, most of us in this valley don't. And you're not listening.
The majority of people do not want.
All right, everyone. Obviously, all of us that have lived here for this long really have strong feelings. I do too, all right?
But then we should be able to share this.
I understand that, and if I had been able to control this meeting, you would all be able to take a turn. I'm sorry.
Well, you are the mayor,
I
right?
am the mayor, and if you're interested in changing the mayor's powers, please let the city council know so that I can set up a meeting where you can come and do all this. Now, when the city council meeting is held on the 18th, I do get to chair that meeting, and I will make sure it's a public hearing where all of you can come up and take your time, okay? Remember the 3-hour form-based code public hearing we had with over 200 people? Yeah, we can do that again. We can. And if you think enough people will come to stand at the podium and give their comments, then we'll schedule it over at the Senior Citizen Center or something like that, okay?
Anybody at
But
Jets flag.
it's not going to help when you give your public comments if you're not able to address these design alternatives that they're going to present to you tonight. So please let them present the design alternatives and make some good comments on what they're going to present tonight, and then I'll make sure that you can get to the podium, okay?
Thank you, Mayor. So, looking at the runways and taxiways, the FAA has standards and recommendations. Certain things are standards, those are non-negotiable from the FAA's perspective. Things that are included in that are width, such as runway width. The current runway width is 75 feet. For C2, it's required to be 100. Pavement strength is a standard. We need to design the pavement or plan for the pavement to be strong enough to handle the forecasted traffic. There will be no change there. There's no need to change that based on the current strength of the pavement. The big one is safety zones and separations. There are a variety of safety zones that the FAA has defined. The intent of those is to keep ensure the safety or enhance the safety of the flying public and the public on the ground. All of those grow larger. You go from B2 to C2. And then under the recommendations category, the main one there is length. Runway length is not a standard. It's a recommendation. And that's because there are a lot of variables in runway length, altitude, weather, all those things impact what length of runway is necessary. So there's a procedure for calculating that, but you're not required to provide the full runway length. In this case, we looked at the quote-unquote worst case, meaning the worst weather conditions and the heaviest aircraft, the design of the critical aircraft in its heaviest configuration, and calculated at 8,600 foot length. But there is, spoiler alert, that's not in the plan. The plan is to maintain the runway length as it is today. The next area to talk about is safety and land control. As I mentioned, there are these safety areas, safety zones that are defined by the FAA. The two critical ones for this discussion are the runway object-free area, which is an area that surrounds the airport, the runway obviously, and then runway protection zones, which are off each end. And so by FAA guidance, those need to be controlled. The land needs to be controlled by the owner in those areas. And the preference is to purchase it, but easements can be used in certain situations. So we need to meet FAA standards for those safety zones in the plan. And the city is not interested in that airport expansion, but in complying with federal regulations. So when you see the alternatives, there are some areas that are shown outside the fence. Those are for safety, not to enhance the capacity of the airport. Moving on to other facilities that we looked at in the planning process, general aviation facilities, hangars, parking aprons, terminal facilities. Let me explain what those are. First, the terminals facilities are not a passenger terminal. It's just the word that the FAA uses for areas where pilots plan their flights and where charter operators pick up their passengers, that sort of thing. Those are usually co-located with a fixed base operator in an airport like yours. And then hangars, there is significant demand for additional hangars at the airport. That's based on both our forecast and on the waiting list that the airport already has. But as I discussed earlier, there are limitations at the airport that will limit how many hangars can be built at the airport. This is severely limited, frankly, compared to the forecast. Support facilities obviously takes a lot from an airport, so we need airport maintenance, summer removal facilities and equipment, aircraft maintenance, fuel storage, de-icing, things like that. Those all get considered in the plan. And then lastly, under other considerations would be infrastructure needs. Does the airport need more water or sewer service, something like that, to meet its demand in the future? And then revenue generation. Are there things that need to be accounted for that will help the airport be self-sufficient financially, like additional facilities for aircraft or also non-aircraft uses like a restaurant and things like that. So all those are considered in the facility requirements section of the study. Just to summarize on facility requirements, the critical aircraft and the forecast require some changes to meet standards. That's the purpose of all the changes, is really to meet standards. Our alternatives to do that are limited based on the constraints of the airport. And so full facility requirements are not being met. The forecast indicates a certain level of demand. We're not able to meet anywhere near that level of demand just because of the constraints that I mentioned earlier. So with that, I'll hand it